Greetings and welcome back to the Casual Wargamer. Tonight's little video is just a little side video, and I'm going to be talking about the likes of this, the Leviathan deck, or what we used to call, only a few years back, the Tactical Objectives deck. This really sort of appeared in 7th edition. Part of my brain wants to say it was the end of 6th, but I don't think it was. I think it was actually just 7th. It was one of the things that got me back into the hobby after a short break following 7th's release. A friend of mine had said, why don't you come give 7th edition a go? It's got this cool new deck format, and we played it and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think the reason why I like this sort of gameplay, and I said this in my recent editions video for 5th, 6th and 7th, is that it feels organic. You're not just looking at a potential 5 or 6 objectives placed haphazardly on the table and you've got to hold them. Tactical objective deck style gives you objectives to do. You can't just sit there as a gun line, or you can't just try and decimate the opponent because it might not necessarily win. You get points for achieving the goals on the cards. Now, with the 7th edition version, and this did go on and impact the 8th edition Tactical Objectives format, is this. All of the objectives were numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, and you might draw a card that says take and hold objective 5. But 5 might be on the other side of the table behind your opponent's troops where you can't get it. You've got no jump troops, you've got no deep striking or anything like that. And it's basically you are stuffed. Because I don't recall there ever being a means of getting rid of cards you couldn't do. I think there might have been under 8th. Memory's a little foggy there, but I'm fairly certain under 7th you couldn't. Again, if I'm wrong, please correct me. But I don't remember there being anything. You also had cards like perform a psychic action, take down a flyer. Well, again, if you were playing the likes of Necrons, you didn't have psychics. Your opponent might not have brought a flyer. Now, most groups that I were aware of, both in person and online, basically said if you can't do an action, you ditch the card and you redraw it. And that's you can't do it during the game, i.e. if you've already lost a psyker, you can't do a psychic power at any point after that, so ditch it. And if your opponent hasn't brought a flyer, either it's in deep strike or whatever, then you can't bring it down, so you ditch it. Because it was only fair. However, I do know that there were people, some of whom played in our club at the time, who didn't like the format simply because if your opponent got a good set of cards and you didn't, you were screwed whatever happened. And I can see that. There's no fun to basically be run roughshod over in that respect. And I think that was the problem in the early days. I think they fixed it a little bit, because they did introduce some cards for specific armies. And they would replace either some of the objective holding cards, or I think in the case of the likes of Necrons, they reduced the do a psychic power type thing as well as others that were not part of your army. And they tried to help in that. Now, 8th edition, I think, improved that tactical objectives format a lot. It still had issues, but it, for me, was still the best way to play the game. I often refer to it as feeling organic. And when people go, what do you mean? Well, it's this. You wouldn't realistically, and I use the term realistically very loosely, bearing in mind that we are talking about a war game set in the far future with big guns and stuff. But you wouldn't be sent to hold a crossroads. You'd be sent to hold a building or a fort or a ruin or something near it where you could control it. But these things don't work like that. 40k has the objectives are down here and this is what you're going for. And you kind of often, especially I think under the likes of 9th and even 10th, you're kind of stuck out in the open once you've plonked these objectives down and you've gone for it. But that's what you do. You sit there and you gunline it, or you charge across the table, and what the likes of the Leviathan deck and previous tactical objective decks do, however, is basically say, look, these are the orders you are being given by your commanding officer, whether that's your Primarch type or whoever, and you have to go and do these objectives. It means you can't just sit there. It means you've got to think about, how am I going to get across the table? Now, with the likes of the Leviathan deck, the idea of going after objective 4, which you might not be able to do, doesn't exist. They've fixed that problem. And now objective holding is your objective, their objective, or an objective in no man's land. It's much better. It plays better. It's much more, should we say easy. You're less likely to pull out a series of cards you can't do. The cast of psychic power, one has gone, things like that. You are not being forced into things you could or couldn't do, or you wouldn't want to do. It's now about objectives that you can actually achieve regardless of your army build, regardless of your choice of army. I do have to say this. I did a video very early on this channel which basically said that the 9th edition missions were boring, and that's because they were all objective based. They were all, here's 5 or 6 objectives, this is how they're laid out, done. The use of a tactical objectives deck means that no 2 games are going to be the same. You are going to end up with a variety of potential either deployment, primary mission, special rule, and even if you had the same 3 cards, based on what you bring and what your opponent brings and the army compositions, you're going to have completely different games, and it's far more interesting. The only thing that I would potentially say is that I do wish they would do, well, I say I do wish, I would like, I'm not going to kind of wish list here, but the idea of having cards again that are based on specific armies would be a nice idea. Extra cards you could slot in to the deck. I doubt we'll see it though. I think the idea of doing that as they did in previous editions probably doesn't work so well. But it would be nice to see something that just made each deck slightly more thematic to the army that played it. Now, I'm going to touch on a slightly different subject. I think the reason that 9th didn't get a set of tactical objectives, a deck format, was because Games Workshop, and have been for a long time, have focused very heavily on the tournament scene. You could easily see this in 9th edition because the secondary objective system that they had was very, very similar to what you would see in the old ITC format. I don't know how that differs these days. I don't pay attention to the big tournament formats. But back then they did a thing where you had a mission and then you would pick a couple of secondaries to do on top of that. And it never interested me. I always thought it was a very silly way of doing it when all the missions were perfectly fine as is. When 9th edition dropped, I think that they focused, and you could see this by the inclusion of the secondary objective system. I think they were trying to focus heavily on the tournament scene, on the competitive circuit. And I think everything that they released from the likes of like the little books like the Arcs of Omen and so on and so forth was geared towards that. 10th, I think, is a completely different animal. I think for all the things that we complain about Games Workshop for, I think 10th edition and its issues aside, it looks to me, right or wrong, that Games Workshop have turned a corner, and that 10th seems to be perfectly playable in a competitive format, but it seems to be a system that's much more geared towards the casual play. It's much more geared towards ease of just playing a game in your local store, in your garage, with your friends. It doesn't seem to be something, I mean, especially with a random deck format, that it's designed to be played primarily at tournaments, unlike, say, the missions of 9th edition. This, I think, is far more fun than having a blanket set of objectives and that's it. But you can already see that tournament organisers they obviously don't like this. Tournaments are generally built on a flat playing area, level playing field. That's the word. A level playing area. They want the game to be about skill and your skill at army building, as well as the luck of the dice. Along comes Leviathan. How many more times can I show this on screen? And that's out the window in their eyes, I think. I think a tactical objective style format like the Leviathan deck emphasizes skill. It does have a random element, obviously, but I think it really plays into the player skill. I'm winning more games, and bear in mind, I'm a super casual guy. I'm winning more games under 10th so far than I ever did under 9th. Because the luck of the draw helps me just as much as it helps my opponent. I can get onto an objective and score points. It's not built around sitting on objectives as much. And it doesn't matter what who I'm playing against or what their army choice is. I do quite well. As a casual player, and using the percentage thing that's on the Tabletop Battles app, I'm about a 1 in 4, 1 in 5 winner. I'm happy with that. Whereas 9th, you can forget that. But I think tournament organisers have very much gone, this isn't the level playing field. And they've, now I can't remember off the top of my head now I'm saying it, whether they did it or whether it's in the Games Workshop tournament update sort of download that they did. But there's a set of, this is the deployment and this is the mission for it and this is the primary mission. And they are choosing from that what your mission is for the game. And I think that's a bit of a bad move. It takes, there's certain random, very odd combos that you can get out of this deck that make it very interesting. Some games flow really, really well because of what you draw. Some of them become really, really awkward. But not in a bad awkward. But that doesn't make, I think, in their eyes, for good tournament play. And so they're picking what you're getting for each round, which I think takes the fun out of it. I think it's better to just let, every round obviously draw the cards, but let them fall where they may. Anyway, that's a last little rant, I suppose, at the end of this. I just want to say how much I really enjoy playing this format over anything else. In fact, I haven't even played any of the generic missions from the 10th edition rulebook, and I've only had a couple of Crusade games so far. What are your thoughts? Are you enjoying the Leviathan deck? Do you like it, dislike it? And what's the whys and why nots? Let me know down below in the comments, and if you can give me a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, that'd be really great. Let me know your thoughts on this particular format down below, and I'll see you soon. Take care, guys. Good gaming.